Now I'm coming to Hans Swarowsky finally. My teacher, Hans Swarowsky, also closely connected with Richard Strauss. That's why he's here. And of course, because he was one of the great conducting teachers of the 20th century. This is no question about that. He was born September 16, 1899 in Budapest, and he died in September 10, 1975 in Salzburg. I have seen him 5 weeks before he died. He had a terrible cancer and he was almost unrecognizable. I visited him in the hospital. It was very clear that he will not survive that. His wife was there. It was a very sad thing for me. This happened also in 1975. I was already for 5 years out of the school. I was already conducting in the United States, and he had a throat cancer, and at that time he could not speak. He had the same cancer which Puccini had. He had something in store, and he said to me, "Sprechen Sie, read, speak. I cannot speak. I want to hear what you have to tell me." So I had to kind of hold a monologue, like I'm doing now. I'm holding a monologue now. I had to hold a monologue, and it could not be a conversation. It was a very sad thing for me. I liked him very dearly. I think it was a mutual thing. I was often in his house. It so happened that his house was very close. I was born in Beethovengasse, by the way, in the street where Beethoven died. That's where I grew up, very much in the center of Vienna, in the 9th district. And he lived right behind the university in Reichsrathstraße, which was, when I walked there, 5-6 minutes away from me, close to the Rathaus, to the city hall. Also, because a little bit Vienna, I think. So just to have that perspective. He was, he had also a very interesting biography, He was the son of a major Viennese industrialist, and he first studied art history and philosophy at the university in Vienna. From 1920, he took lessons in music theory and conducting with Arnold Schoenberg and then with Anton Webern. After working as an accompanist, he worked as a conductor at the Vienna Volksoper, so the second opera house first, and then at the Stuttgart Opera House. He was the first Kapellmeister and opera director at the Prussian Theater in Gera, before joining the Hamburg State Opera in 1934 and the Berlin State Opera in 1935. According to an alleged prohibition in 1936, Swarowsky was from 1937 until 1940, he was also at the Zurich Opera House. At the invitation, and now we are coming to Richard, just one thing in general. I will come to that later on. As a conducting teacher, one thing which made him so unique was the teachers he had. And all his teachers were composers, great composers. Schoenberg, then Webern, and there's a big contrast to Richard Strauss. And Strauss was also a great conductor, and the conducting he taught us was the idea of Richard Strauss. Just to be very clear and to develop your beat on your own personality by clarity. This was the great thing about him. He was not telling you, now you have to make something like that or this. As long as it was clear, it did not have to be the way he would do it, but he was, of course, absolutely adamant when it came to tempi and Beethoven, and to everything which had to do with the composition per se. That made him so great. In one way, he gave us the freedom to develop on our own abilities and personalities. On the other hand, he made no doubt what was really important in all of this, and it was the printed score. The printed score to study and to get deeper and deeper and deeper in this. And there's no end. And of all my remembrances I have with Swarowsky, when I became his student, he was already 69 years old. Not to forget, as I got him much later as Abbat or Zubin Mehta. They were 10 years before me, or more than 10 years before me. He was 69 years old. And he would talk about the Beethoven Symphony, just like I would do with you, in the class. And then he would look and he's going, oh my gosh, you know, and he still noticed things and he got very excited about it. And this is a remembrance I will never forget, because it showed all of us, you know, there is no end, no end, not with Beethoven, not with Brahms or with any of these people, you know, where you always, right now you know everything. We never know everything. There's always something, and you, which Beethoven in particular, well, I'm older than Swarowsky now, and I see this too, but I like to mention this because it showed the depth of his teaching, this seriousness, you know, he brought to the whole thing. He allowed no superficiality, none, you know, but his success was because he allowed and welcomed individuality as long as the basic was correct. That made him so incredibly wonderful. On top of it, he was a linguist. He spoke several languages fluently. He could speak Italian, French. German was his mother tongue, you know, English, of course. And the connection, because we were a quite international class. I tell you, Kelly, I had a Chinese student colleague in my class in English. Aryo Pan was his name, Aryo Pan. So I started in 1968 until 1970 with Swarowsky, okay? And the one Chinese colleague I had, a student, was Aryo Pan. I still remember his name. It's long ago, you know. But other than that, we had the Fischer brothers, were both my colleagues, Adam Fischer, Ivan Fischer. That's why I could bring Adam, you know, a speaker in the semester before, you know. So they were really, he had I come to that later. He had a number, of course, many conductors who were later really made remarkable careers. The ones always mentioned are, of course, Zubin Mehta and Claudio Abbado. Anyway, back to Richard Strauss. At the invitation of Richard Strauss and Clemens Krauss, Swarowsky worked on the libretto for the opera Capriccio. That's important, you know. The German text version of the Ronsard sonnet, Kein anderes, which is so dear to me, comes from him. This is really very significant. He was a linguist. He knew literature. He was a very, very deeply, not only in music, but in all areas, particularly also in visual arts, enormously cultivated man. Going with him into a museum was unbelievably enlightening. He knew so much about some of those famous paintings. He would often compare certain painters with composers. So I remember Rafael with Mozart, for instance, was something he often mentioned, you know. He transferred numerous older opera librettos from operas by Verdi, Gluck, and Haydn and Monteverdi into German. So this was at the time where the operas in Austria, in Vienna also, were still performed all in German language. It was Karajan who changed that later at the Vienna State Opera. But even now today, in the Volksopera, they would still perform a Verdi or an Italian opera in German. And Swarowsky, being such a linguist, has translated many of these operas into German. And because he was a musician, he knew exactly about the didactic, you know, and the rhythmic thing carefully, you know, that words would, as much as possible, reflect the meaning from another language, which of course is not easy, you know, and it takes then somebody who really knew the music and the content so intimately to do it well. Between 1940 and 1944, he also worked as a dramaturg at the Salzburg Festival. From 1944 until his last concert in 1945, he was chief conductor of the Philharmonic Orchestra in Krakow, in occupied Poland. This sounds terrible in one way, but what he has done, he was actually not on good standing with the Nazi regime at all. But the terrible guy at that time was this Commissioner Frank, who happened to be an enormous music lover, you know. And Swarowsky was able to persuade Frank that some of the musicians were absolutely necessary to play in that orchestra, otherwise there would be no concerts. And these were, many of them were Poles and Jewish citizens, you know, and so he saved them from the, he saved Jews from the Gestapo. So this is the other Strauss, Richard Strauss associate compared to the two ones I mentioned before with Clemens Krauss and Böhm. A big difference. Now, after the war, from 1945 to 1947, he was chief conductor of the Vienna Symphony Orchestra, with which he remained also after these years in very regular collaboration, championing particularly works by Mahler. Also, was a big Mahler lover, Swarowsky. My first experience with his Symphony No. 3 live, I heard with Swarowsky. I spoke before how wonderful his performance with Horenstein was, but Horenstein I never saw. But Swarowsky was, with him I had the first live performance. I remember it very well. It was 1967 or something like that at that time. From 1947 to 50, so 3 years, he was also director of the opera in Graz, also the second biggest city. And for 2 years in the 50s, from 57 to 59, he was music director of the Scottish Orchestra in Glasgow. In addition, he devoted himself then completely to teaching, but also conducted over 180 performances at the Vienna State Opera until shortly before his death. I've seen him often conducting in the opera, you know, very often. You know. He was really a regular guest, and I also saw him in concerts, also particularly with the Vienna Symphony. Even after he was not the chief conductor anymore, he was a regular conductor in the Vienna scene, conducting a lot of concerts and opera performances. But he was also guest conducting outside in Europe, in Canada. There's a very funny story about when he was here. When he was conducting in Montreal, I must laugh when I think about it. He was conducting at the Expo in Montreal. Okay, and no, I'm sorry. He was, forget that. He was in Montreal conducting the MSO because Zubin Mehta invited him. Zubin Mehta was the music director of the OSM for some years and invited his teacher to conduct the OSM. All right, Swarowsky came, conducted, got a rave review, you know, everything was wonderful, fantastic review, a world-class conductor. In later, Carl Böhm, who was far more famous as conductor, you know, came with the Vienna Philharmonic to Montreal at the Expo. I'm not sure now in which year it was, you know, and there was a review afterwards also. It was also a very good review, but when Böhm read it, his face got red and he got very angry. And somebody who was sitting next to him, he said, "Why are you so angry? This is a wonderful review." And Böhm said, read until the end. Read this until the end. Can you believe this? You know. And the last sentence in the review was, I love it. In his best moments, Böhm came even up to the unforgettable Hans Swarowsky. How you like that? Isn't that a fantastic story? I love it. I can't help it. Somebody told me that who was at that, who was an eyewitness at that, so I believe it. I needed to tell you this. Also, some of his famous students, about, of course, the recently sadly died Gabriel Kmura, who had died on an accident. He was just happening a year ago. Jesus Lopez Cobos, one of the most prominent Spanish conductors. Jacques de la Côte was a real colleague of mine. The two Fischers, Adam and Ivan, both were colleagues of mine. Maris Jansons was his student. I met Maris in Vienna, where our friendship started in Vienna. Kitaenko, Miguel Gomez Martinez, I knew very well. Zubin Mehta, of course, and also Giuseppe Sinopoli. He was a regular juror in several international conducting competitions, of course, the one in New York of Dimitri Mitropoulos and the Karajan competition in Berlin. And I'm going to send, of course, all the links I could find of Swarowsky, particularly conducting Strauss, wonderful Strauss performances he did as Richard Strauss, including Heldenleben, but also other works. As I mentioned, the Symphony No. 3 I know this was his favorite Mahler symphony. I always said the third symphony. Of course, this wonderful ending and so forth. So you're going to get Symphony Number 3. He did in Berlin, Symphony Number 4, which is one of the best performances of 4 you can ever imagine. He did that with the Czech Philharmonic in Prague. Fantastic performance, maybe the best of all, you know, of that symphony, really fantastic. And also the 5th symphony, I think it's a live recording with the Vienna Symphony Orchestra. Then of course all kinds of numbers of classical music, Haydn, Mozart. Mozart was very strong. You know, this idea of conducting the slow movements in 2 and not subdividing in 6, I owe to him. I owe to him. You know, I also thought I have to come Hauser, no, you can't do that, he said to me. You know, this is the way to start it. I practiced this a whole night. I was standing in front of a mirror, you know, and making sure that I see this slow motion very clearly. You know, remember this one. When I give these things, you know, this I owe to him, you know, and he taught that at a time when nobody did it. Böhm was doing all these kind of stupid subdivisions, you know. Swarowsky had this fantastic, he was in a way a pioneer of correct, you know, interpretation, particularly of the classics before Harnoncourt and certainly all these people from England, and you know, if this now Gardiner or Norrington, they're all doing wonderful. He was a pioneer. And one more time, the greatness of him as a teacher was his teachers. Once again, Schoenberg, Schoenberg, Webern, and particularly Richard Strauss. With Richard Strauss, of course, he spoke a lot about the conducting, also technique. When he analyzed the Symphony Number 3 of Brahms with us in the class, he told us, you know, the way he said it, this is not from me. I learned this from Schoenberg, you know, so you can believe what I'm telling you. And you know how reassuring this is when you hear something like this from a conductor, that somebody like Schoenberg was giving this kind of incredible, fantastic analysis of the Brahms symphony. And of course, if you have one analysis like that, you can analyze all of them. And so this made it. And I had a conducting teacher before Swarowsky. He was also a wonderful musician, wonderful, but he did not teach this kind of score analysis. Playing on the piano, yes, but not score analysis. He just didn't teach it. It was new for me when I came to Swarowsky, completely new. And I remember the first class with Swarowsky was for me a shock, because he spoke only about numbers. You know what I'm doing with you now? 4 bars, 6 bars, you know, this kind of thing. I've never heard this before, you know, and it took me a while. Where's the heart? Where's the soul? I was first of all thinking, until I realized that this is what brings the whole thing together, and that heart, soul has to be controlled by the mind. I owe this to him, and I'm enormously grateful for that. And I'm thrilled that I can pass it on